that leads to, of course, a community response. That leads to police coming in and escalating, and then a further escalation, very intentional provocation with the National Guard. And I just think, as we're sorting through all of these things, it's really important to keep the big picture in mind. Donald Trump on day one signed an executive order analyzing whether he should invoke the Insurrection Act. He's been looking for an excuse and a pretext to do this from day one. It's not an accident also that this happens at a moment when, his top supporters just accused him of being a pedo and being in the Jeffrey Epstein files. So he is using this moment to effectuate authoritarian ends, an authoritarian crackdown on all dissent. And make no mistake, this is LA now. This is a warning to everyone in the country, especially in blue cities, that they will come out and they will crush you and they will use the military. There's actually no limiting principle in the executive order that he signed, bringing in the National Guard, which, all the legal experts are saying is wildly illegal to do without the consent of the governor of the state of California. Newsom is now suing him over that. But this is an authoritarian, a wannabe fascist who is using this moment to crack down and claim even more power for himself, something he has wanted to do from day one. At the same time, I also don't think it's an accident. It comes, like I was saying, not only with the pedo stuff, but, politically things haven't gone terribly well for him. Doge is a disaster. Elon is, setting everything ablaze. The tariffs are a mess. Even on the issue where he's been the strongest historically, immigration, with the Kilmar Abrego Garcia, they had to buckle. They had to bring him back because the pressure, both from the public and from the court system, was too much apparently to bear. So he's suffering a lot of political losses. And one thing people should understand with authoritarians is the more shaky ground they're on, the more, heavy-handed tactics that they're going to deploy. And I think that's part and parcel of what we're seeing here.
Yeah, it's interesting. What kind of ground do you think Trump's on to actually pull off a truly authoritarian kind of sweeping maneuver that we talk about, as far as like actually shutting down democracy, declaring martial law? Because you just referenced, with the Kilmar Abrego Garcia thing, massive L for the Trump regime, just as far as the optics of that, after swearing up and down that he would never set foot in America once again. Well, he's back in America. There's been other instances too where they've just straight up been defeated, had to admit defeat and retreat. Obviously, there's even dumb things like, Trump briefly kind of joking, memeing about the Trump 2028 stuff, seemed to put that away pretty quickly after realizing how unpopular it was. So do you think that Trump really does want to try to go full fascist, full authoritarian, lock down this country, lock down democracy, arrest his political opponents? Do you think that really is what he wants to do? And if it is, do you think he'll be able to be successful?
I mean, yeah, I think it's what he wants to do. He's threatening to arrest Gavin Newsom today. I mean, this is insanity. Any other president. And that's the thing, is on the one hand, you're right that he's suffered some losses. There have been some successful efforts to curb his most maximalist impulses, whether it was the checking of the bond market or whether it was the public pressure over Kilmar Abrego Garcia. On the other hand, it's unbelievable the things he's able to normalize. And so I think this is an attempt to normalize the use of the military for domestic law enforcement, especially in blue cities across the country. I was on with Piers Morgan today, which was a shit show as usual.
Has that been published yet?
I don't think it's up yet. I don't know how long the delay is between you record. I recorded at 11 a.m. today. So I don't know, 11 a.m. Eastern today. So I don't know exactly when it's going to post. But I was kind of struck by Roger Stone and that guy Clay Travis were on the panel with me. Those were like the writers on the panel. And they were both saying, like, we need law and order. We need to arrest them. We need to make sure we're enforcing the law. And I was like, that's what law enforcement is for. But there was already this acceptance in their head of arrests need to be made. Therefore, we need the Marines. Like, that's where their head is. And I think I think that is the play, is to attempt to make that normal, to attempt to make it so that, the only way that we can enforce the law is by turning the United States military on American citizens. And obviously, the more chaos, the more escalation they're able to provoke, the more authoritarian powers Trump is going to be able to claim. So they are going, I think they have been wanting to incite some sort of a spectacle from the beginning. One other thing I'll say on that point is, did you guys see the report? Dr. Phil was embedded.
Yes, broke. Kyle actually sent me that this morning.
It's like, what? So yeah, so he, pre-planned. They had him go and, hang out with ICE and do an interview with Tom Homan in the context of these ICE raids on workplaces. It was like a garment manufacturer and a Home Depot and I don't know where else. So they were preparing like a made-for-TV reality show spectacle, which just tells you how intentional and how sick this is. I mean, it's like, we should never lose sight of. These are people's lives. Like, these are people with families being ripped out of their community, just trying to live here and like work hard and do the right thing and make a better life for themselves and their family. It's truly, truly sick. This ideology is truly grotesque and truly anti-human, which is, something that Trump and Elon both shared in common, frankly.
Yeah, one of the things that you mentioned is that there's this big push from the right wing for law and order, right? And that's one of the responses that they have to the unrest that we're seeing, to put it mildly, right? But it's legitimate protests, right? It's people that are out there peacefully demonstrating, saying, you're not going to unravel our community, you're not going to do these things. But yet what the right wing, particularly Don Jr., is putting out is an actual scathing indictment of the police. I'm sure you saw this last night. Make rooftop Koreans great again. For people who don't know, right, I just went down a large rabbit hole, okay, with the OJ thing and the 90s and everything that happened. This was a scathing indictment of the Los Angeles Police Department the day that, like, during the Rodney King uprising, right, when they completely abandoned that part of Los Angeles. There was, basically just mass militias, right, and the Korean business owners, like, they could be demonized or they can be, valorized, but the reality was is they were just people there, and 50 people died, right? It was what happens when there was no apparatus to keep people safe. There was no leadership or any kind of action from the police department. It's what they constantly fearmonger about. They are the ones that are constantly saying, we have to have a police department. We can't allow, a vigilante justice, all these kinds of things, right?
Right. But now the police department's not enough. Now it's, the 7,000 or 9,000 LA cops they have who are out there shooting reporters. And I'm sure you saw the clip of them like running over a protester with their horses and beating the shit out of him because they thought no one was watching. Like, their position is now that's not insane or aggressive enough, that we need Marines. We need the National Guard. And your point about the LA riots, it's really important people understand. The LA riots in 1992, we're talking $1 billion in damage. In 1992, we're talking about over 60 people killed. We're talking about thousands of, there is zero comparison between what we're seeing today and what we're seeing then. And the reason it's important to bring that up is because that is the last time that the National Guard was federalized, but that was done at the request of California authorities, which is how it has to be done in order to be lawful and constitutional.
Yeah, I also think that there's an issue as far as like the public's response to this. You talked about how this might actually benefit Trump and people might not all be as outraged about this as we are. I think there's something to be said about the fact that our actual police forces have become so militarized in recent memory that now when the actual military is turned against Americans, it doesn't really feel that much different than how it. Yeah, exactly. Because the cops, they get so much equipment from the military. They're increasingly militarized. They drive around crazy tank-looking things. I mean, I remember the summer of the George Floyd protest, Kansas City literally felt like it was occupied by a military force. There's so many police in militarized gear on the streets. Obviously, that was 5 years ago. It's only gotten worse since then. But I think that really proves that a lot of the people in the, defund camp, a lot of the people that had this message of, we need to actually seriously take some power away from these cops. I think it's vindicating them because now people just look around and they don't even realize what the difference is.
Yeah, well, and the abolish ICE people certainly vindicated, certainly. But that's such a great point. Because I saw videos yesterday of like, oh, here's the National Guard rolling out. And like you said, it looked exactly like, military all kitted out and all this. And it was the LAPD. It wasn't even the National Guard. You cannot tell the difference because of the way they're all geared and suited up. So, I mean, I do think that is an extraordinarily important point, that has already, to a certain extent, normalized the use of the U.S. military against citizens, because the police officers have all of that same gear and present in the same, aggressive, offensive manner as active duty soldiers would.
Do you think that there's a chance that they are able to kind of wait everyone out? Because one of the things that I always think about in the wake of the George Floyd movement was how hard everybody was going, right? And Gavin and I were with everyone. We were at the park every fucking day. We were there. And it was the first time anybody was getting out from COVID. So you were seeing everybody. There was so much happening. And it felt like this was the time everybody was drawing a line in the sand, and we were going to get some real change, and the people's voices were going to be heard. And we talked to everyone about how it was, from coast to coast, all 50 states, largest protest movement in American history, all of these things. And slowly but surely, they just kind of waited everyone out, right? They just kind of waited everyone out. They gave us the half-assed police reform bill that was under Joe Biden. Joe Biden talked down to all of the black leaders that tried to, really push him to deliver something somewhat tangible for the American people when it came to reform that they demanded. And unfortunately, we didn't get any of that, right? We didn't really have the reaction that people wanted. People are still getting murdered every single day by the police. It's still a corrupt system. I worry that we will have this ferocious standoff, and then Donald Trump is still president for 3 more years, and we just kind of get business as usual, and then they go back to doing the deportations. Do you know what I mean? How do you think we can sustain this kind of resistance in a way that's going to make it more long-term effective?
I think there's something hopeful in, there are many depressing things, but there's also something hopeful in looking at the model of the pro-Palestine movement, which obviously hasn't had the impact we all want in terms of ending the genocide, but has had a huge impact and has been sustained in terms of moving public opinion. I think it's really been a model of a successful protest movement in terms of the way that it has changed hearts and minds. And, now we're at a place where, excuse me, I was just talking about having been on with Piers Morgan, even a Piers Morgan is like, shit, those people they were right. It's a genocide. That, is cold comfort when you look at the fact that the genocide is still going on. But, there is something to be said for the tactics that have been deployed there. And not every issue will be as intractable as our endless support for Israel's genocide. I also think that there's something hopeful in what happened with Kilmar Abrego Garcia, right? Kristi Noem went to Congress and said, there is no scenario in which he's coming back. None. And here we are, just a matter of weeks later, and he's coming back. Now, he's got charges filed against him. We'll see where all of that goes. But he's going to get due process, and he's going to be brought back to the U.S., and the Trump administration did have to cave there. And remember, all those people, they're still out there pretending like, oh, this is such a bad issue for Democrats, and you can't talk about it, and just talk about egg prices, and this is terrible. Wrong. The data is in. Trump's immigration approval rating fell dramatically, especially during the period of time when Kilmar Abrego Garcia was being most discussed, when there were most protests. You had protests, you had people showing up at their, congressional members when they would deign to do a town hall, show up and yell at them about that. You actually had members of Congress going down to El Salvador, Chris Van Hollen, and you had a judicial response. And all of those things mounted to enough pressure that even this lawless fascist administration felt that they could not quite withstand it. And that crack is important because you have 200 plus other men who were down in Sikot, who received zero due process, who were sent to the slave labor camp for life, the vast majority of whom have no criminal record here or anywhere else, by the way. And the fact that you could bring one back means you could bring any of them back. So that crack is incredibly important. And I think something to be hopeful about when we think about how to sustain the pressure. The other thing is that, unfortunately, they're going to continue to do absolutely insane authoritarian things that are going to continue to, create incentive for people to get out in the streets and make their voices heard. So that particular thing I'm not worried about, because I think they have unfortunately given us so much motivation and put so much at stake in this really existential way. I wanted to just go back to what Gavin was asking me about with regard to, do they really want to go like full fascist? And I do think that maybe a little bit underplayed is the danger that the midterm elections are in. Not that they're going to cancel the elections, but they can use these sorts of phony ginned up crises to take some control of local elections. So that's That's something I'm concerned about. But we talked to Shoykat Chakrabarti, which, by the way, you guys should interview him. I think he'd do it, and you have a great convo if you haven't done that before. But in any case, he was saying that he doesn't think people are grappling with how destabilizing it is that you just have an entire party that's willing to just say that any election is the results are rigged and it's fake, and just completely deny and not accept the legitimacy of democratic elections. And I don't think we really are set up to deal with that. And you know, with the way that they're willing to just brazenly lie in the most preposterous ways and distort reality and use their media platforms to do that, I think that is also a real danger that is kind of staring us down, that people aren't necessarily grappling with.
Look out the door if you hear an ambulance. The Vanguard will be there, sir. The Vanguard will be there, sir. The Vanguard will be there, sir. The Vanguard will be there. Be there. The